Aquí estamos en La Verdad nos hace libres desde el corazón de Sudamérica para Latinoamérica y el mundo, y como ustedes han visto en esta breve presentación estamos con el jefe del Servicio de Formulación de Políticas, Movilización, Coordinación y Presentación de Informes de la Oficina de las Naciones Unidas para los países menos adelantados, países en desarrollo sin litoral y pequeños estados insulares en desarrollo, a quien le damos la bienvenida. Un abrazo, es un gusto tenerlo aquí en Bolivia en esta emisión especial de La Verdad nos hace libres, y queremos que mande su saludo, por favor, a todo el país y todos los lugares donde nos estarán viendo y escuchando. Bueno, Mr. Erdenebileg, es un poquito complicado pronunciar su nombre, pero díganos brevemente qué es lo que hace las Naciones Unidas, esta oficina de las Naciones Unidas de alto representante para los países menos adelantados, y qué objetivos específicos se persigue en este momento.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Erdenebileg, for being with us. And first, we would like to learn a little bit more about the role of the OHRLLS in the world, and what are the goals that you pursue as part of High Representative Office of the United Nations.
Thank you very much. First, let me say a few words about the Office of the High Representative. So this office is in charge of dealing with the three most vulnerable groups of countries: least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states.
Nuestra meta es trabajar con países que no cuenten con una salida soberana al mar, países en desarrollo todavía y pequeños estados insulares.
And the Secretary General of the United Nations, who directly reports to the Secretary General of the United Nations.
Mi deber es reportar el desarrollo de todos estos estados directamente ante las Naciones Unidas.
Raise international awareness of the special needs and developmental challenges confronted by landlocked developing countries.
Nuestra meta es monitorear aquellos asuntos que tratan directamente con el desarrollo de todos estos pequeños países y estados menos adelantados.
To mobilize international support measures to these countries.
Estamos también encargados de movilizar ayuda a estos estados menos atendidos.
And assisting these countries. So this is the highest office in the United Nations which is dedicated to deal.
Esta es la oficina más alta en las Naciones Unidas, dedicada directamente al apoyo y al soporte de países menos desarrollados, incluyendo estados peninsulares, además de países quienes no cuentan con una salida soberana a ninguna costa marítima.
Bolivia es uno de los 32 países de los 4 continentes que pertenecen a este grupo dudoso. ¿Cuáles son los problemas socioeconómicos que son exclusivos que aquellos países que carecen de acceso soberano a una costa marítima comúnmente enfrentan, Mr.?
Bolivia is one of those 32 countries spread out in 4 continents that belongs to this dubious group of countries with a challenging socioeconomic situations. What is so unique about these countries, and what are the problems that those 32 countries commonly face that are unique to them?
Yeah, the landlocked developing countries are face very special challenges.
Estos países enfrentan unos retos bastante particulares.
For these countries comes from the geographical situation.
Gracias a su situación geográfica deben enfrentar situaciones bastante particulares. Necesitan tener un acceso al mar.
They have to go through their transit neighbors.
Al no contar con este acceso al mar, ellos tienen que siempre depender de sus países vecinos, de países en tránsito que pasen por su terreno.
Of the international trade and the economy, and their infrastructure for transport infrastructure is not.
Su economía y su infraestructura dependen directamente de aquellos países vecinos que usan su territorio para transitar, como territorio de tránsito simplemente.
And lack of adequate infrastructure development, additional border crossings, because if they have to cross the borders with the neighboring countries, make the international trade transaction costs very expensive.
Definitivamente tienen que pagar costos muchísimo más altos cuando ellos desean exportar, ya sea materia prima o productos. Definitivamente la aduana en general representa un costo bastante alto para su economía.
Because the GDP, about the 40% of the GDP of the landlocked developing countries on average, comes from the international trade. So the rate of international trade is very
Definitivamente la economía de este tipo de países está siempre a merced de sus países vecinos. Es por eso que se encuentran bastantes tasas bien fluctuantes en cuanto a índices económicos.
That is the major common challenge confronted by 32 landlocked developing countries in Asia.
Este es el problema más común que enfrentan estos 32 países en los 4 continentes.
Well, I appreciate that. Now we're going to cut here, studios. We are having a lot of feedback coming from, let me say that in English, in Spanish. Mucho feedback coming, viniendo de Bolivia. Así que a partir de ahora, toda la entrevista, hasta que vayamos a la parte que volvamos a Bolivia, va a estar en inglés sin necesidad de traducción. Luego, por favor, la traducción la hacen con voiceover, porque se enreda mucho con el Skype, llega muy atrasado, ¿ok? So what we're going to be doing from this point on, the interview is going to be in English. So then the voiceover will be dubbed after we finish the interview. So we will not have the feedback that we're having now. Okay?
Teníamos que chequear cómo vamos a editar esto, Pocho. Wait, please.
Sí.
¿Qué sugieres, Pavel? Que Fabiola traduzca adentro. Le bajas el retorno aquí, entonces que le baje el retorno aquí y ella sigue traduciendo para que, o ¿cómo hacemos?
Bolivia pays more than 40% for the external, for the transport of Bolivian goods to the third markets.
Mr. Excuse me, Mr. Erdenebileg, can you say again, please, the last words? But hold on, please. Hold on. ¿Cómo es, Pavel? Ya, graben. Vamos. 1, 2, 3. Go ahead.
I wanted to emphasize that because of the disadvantaged geographical situation, landlocked developing countries spend much more money for their transport services. The typical landlocked developing country spend about 45% more for transport services compared to their coastal neighbors. For example, to example of Bolivia, if you compare to Bolivia to Chile, your transit neighbor, the transport costs Bolivia paid for the transport services is much higher than in Chile. It should be around double-digit higher, at least in case of Bolivian case.
Wow. Those are significant numbers, and over the years, popular opinion of the United Nations has been that there's an organization that serves the purposes of the elite countries that deal with their big issues, and rather than organization for we the peoples, as the United Nations Charter calls. However, these might be the other side of the coin. Your Office of the High Representative for least developed landlocked countries and the small islands has a direct impact on the way many countries develop. This is really where the rubber meets the road per se of development and actions of international organizations like the United Nations impacting in a country. And I agree with you on many of the opportunities for landlocked countries depend on the goodwill of the neighbors and also on the infrastructure of the neighbors, whatever infrastructure they have available. But it always happens, or not always happens, rather, that the neighboring country might not have the same priorities than the landlocked nation, or will have little or no goodwill to help out on those areas, or will have definitely will be involved in other projects. So how do you address that practical problem of the needs of the landlocked countries and their neighbors that might not see their needs as priorities?
Yeah, I think it is very important for landlocked developing countries to have a very good cooperation and collaboration with the transit neighbors. So that is one of the purpose of the Office of the High Representative for LDCs and LLDCs and CIS is to develop good cooperation and relations between landlocked developing countries and the transit neighbors. The United Nations convened the second United Nations Conference on Landlocked Developing Countries and 3 years ago, and then they adopted the Vienna Program of Action for Landlocked Developing Countries. The whole purpose of that program of action is develop good cooperation, good relations between landlocked and transit developing countries. So the United Nations is promoting the international legal framework to strengthen cooperation between landlocked and transit developing countries. And then also United Nations is implementing joint projects to assist both landlocked and transit developing countries. So that we wanted to provide the win-win solution to both landlocked and transit developing countries. So there are a number of very important international documents and instruments for which are important for both landlocked and transit developing countries. The first one I mentioned, the Vienna Program of Action. And the second document I wanted to mention is that the Trade Facilitation Agreement of the World Trade Organization. The whole agenda, the whole focus of the Trade Facilitation Agreement is to facilitate goods in transit, to make goods from landlocked developing countries move smoothly and cost effectively through their transit neighbors. So that is very important agreement. Very recently, in about a few weeks ago, that agreement came into force. So the implementation of that agreement will be very important for the landlocked developing countries and for transit developing countries. The WTO agreement has a very strong element on transport. It also has a very strong article on freedom of transit. So the landlocked developing countries can claim for the freedom of transit. And then it also has the built-in dispute settlement mechanism. If there is any dispute between the landlocked and transit developing countries, they can also go to the dispute settlement mechanism of the World Trade Organization. So that is very important agreement, and then that the landlocked developing countries and transit countries can benefit from. And as you know, the WTO agreements are always binding agreements. So that is the implementation of that agreement is binding for landlocked countries and for the transit neighbors. But there are many other international agreements and conventions promoted by the United Nations. We have about 50 international conventions and agreements in the area of transport. So that is the important legal instrument for landlocked developing countries to benefit when they deal with the international transit, international trade.
Well, I appreciate that those comments. This issue is not just an issue of connectivity, as you know. There are situations that don't happen in a vacuum. We have a political relationship. We have the socioeconomic impact. And for example, Bolivia, after 138 years that lost its maritime quality and lost its 420 kilometers of seacoast, end up in 2013 initiating a legal action against Chile before the International Court of Justice. This is a process that is undergoing. How does your office perceive a situation like this?
Well, I think as I mentioned, the Office of the High Representative is the part of the United Nations. We are in the Secretariat of the United Nations, so we bind to the UN guidance and rules and regulations. So we are here to serve the member states of the United Nations. So we are here to assist both landlocked and transit countries to develop good cooperation and good collaboration. But our office is not the legal office, but we are the main purpose of our office is to develop transport cooperation between landlocked and transit developing countries, including Chile and Bolivia, and also there are the second landlocked country in Paraguay. We also assisting Paraguay in implementing the UN agreements and the UN program for landlocked developing countries.
One of the issues, thank you very much. One of the issues that we see in Bolivia is the issue of the smuggling that goes on between with our neighbors with access to the sea. Is there any provisions on the United Nations to combat, to help landlocked countries to deal with that issue? As those disputes take place, there is always the vision of one country and the vision of the other country, reports, etc., that create a very difficult environment because each side has their own perception of how those problems are created and how they should be resolved. So, do you deal as a package, as a holistic package of solutions for landlocked countries, also issues related to just like the ones we just mentioned?
As I mentioned, one of the important mandate of our office is to mobilize and coordinate international support measures in favor of landlocked developing countries. There are many international organizations which deal with the specific aspects of the transport of landlocked developing countries. The World Bank is providing assistance to landlocked developing countries. UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, there provides assistance in terms of the border crossing for landlocked developing countries. We are also working very closely with the World Customs Organization. We are also working very closely with the United Nations Regional Economic Commission for Latin America, International Road Transport Union, etc. So each of these organizations has its own unique comparative advantage when it comes to the international trade and then border crossings. So each of these organizations has a specific technical cooperation activities to support the landlocked developing countries. So yes, there's certain issues, the border crossing issue, illegal payment, so how to make the border crossing more efficient. All these issues many of these organizations can provide assistance to Bolivia in resolving all these issues. But again, the main point when it comes to the international border, the main point is the good cooperation between landlocked and transit developing countries. So as I mentioned, the Vienna Program of Action is about the cooperation between landlocked and transit developing countries, is about the partnerships between landlocked and transit developing countries. So that is the whole the purpose of the program.
Okay, go ahead, Pocho.
Okay, I have a question for you. Paraguay and Bolivia are the only landlocked countries in Latin America,
yeah.
But there are many other countries in 4 other continents. And is there any unique situation that we face in Latin America, or we commonly share just about every other challenge, such as our landlocked brothers in Asia or in Africa? Is there any specific activities that your high office has specifically aimed at Latin America?
Yes, of course, the landlocked developing countries have, of course, the common problems, but every landlocked developing country has a very unique unique problems too. So that we are trying to assist the landlocked developing countries to address the unique problems in the specific region. But in the Bolivia and Paraguay, of course, they face many common challenges confronted by many other landlocked developing countries in Asia and Latin America, in Asia and Africa. But I think one of the unique challenges of Bolivia and Paraguay is the coordinated infrastructure development. The infrastructure development is very important. The mobilization of international financing to develop the infrastructure and development is very important. For example, in the case of Paraguay, the internal water transport is very important. I think the water transport the river transport is very important aspect for Paraguay. So we also, not only our office, but the other United Nations system organizations also providing some support to Bolivia and Paraguay. And then also one of the aspects of our work is to find out what are the main specific challenges in Bolivia and Bolivia and Paraguay. So for that purpose, we commission a study on Bolivia and Paraguay every few years. So that one of the main purpose of that study is to identify the key bottlenecks and then identify the measures need to be undertaken to address that problem. So we are working very closely with the Economic Commission for Latin America. We commissioned a study about 2 years ago on the Latin American transit transport. So that report has a very specific recommendation. So we are working with the Economic Commission for Latin America and other countries to assist Bolivia and Paraguay. And the last year we had a high-level meeting in Santa Cruz in Bolivia. We brought the transport ministers from landlocked developing countries. We also brought the high-level officials from the transit countries. So that is the main purpose of that meeting was to learn from each other, to exchange their experience and an idea. So that is, and then also to implement the best practices, which is used in other sub-regions, also to bring those best practices to Latin America. So that kind of activity we work on.
Mr. Erdenebileg, thank you so very much for your time. I'm going to now ask my colleague in La Paz, Bolivia, to ask a final question. Paramos acá un segundito. Okay, listo con tu pregunta.
Sí, vamos.
Okay, now he's going to ask the question.
Este diálogo, díganos algo más sobre el trabajo que está haciendo esta oficina de las Naciones Unidas y cuáles son los retos más importantes que tienen en estos países y en toda esta descripción que ha hecho en este 2017.
What are the biggest challenges, the landmarks for 2017 vis-a-vis these landlocked countries and in view of all the actions that you've been taking over these many years, what are your key objectives for 2017?
2017, I think for us is to assist landlocked developing countries in the implementation of the WTO agreement on trade facilitation. Now, this agreement entered into force just a few weeks ago. It is a very important agreement for landlocked developing countries. So we will assist the landlocked developing countries in implementing this agreement, because the landlocked developing countries have a very strong commitment to implement this agreement, and I think we will make efforts to make it clear to the landlocked developing countries, to make the landlocked developing countries understand the important provisions of this agreement, and then to implement that agreement. So we will coordinate the international support measures. We will be working very closely with the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the UNCTAD, and the Regional Economic Commission. So that is the key priority for us first. And the secondly is that, as you know, the United Nations adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So the implementation phase of that agenda just started. So we are trying to put the landlocked developing countries in the center of the follow-up activities of the 2030 Development Agenda. So that will be the main, one of the main purpose for us. And then, of course, the issue of the climate change is also very important for landlocked developing countries, because though the Paris Agreement does not mention the landlocked developing countries namely, but I think the Paris Agreement contains very important aspects for the landlocked developing countries, such as desertification, land degradation, drought. These are very important part of the climate change, and I think landlocked developing countries face huge problems in that area. So that is also one of our objectives, to facilitate landlocked developing countries benefit from these landmark international documents and agreements.
One last question, please. Una última pregunta más, por favor, Juan Carlos, para el señor Erdenebileg de las Naciones Unidas, con quien estamos dialogando, quien gentilmente ha accedido a esta entrevista. Él está en las Naciones Unidas en este momento, nuestro corresponsal Juan Carlos Salcedo en Nueva York. Queremos preguntarle así brevemente que nos responda cómo ve el rol de los medios de comunicación en estas demandas que tienen países descritos por esta oficina de las Naciones Unidas que tienen litigios ante la Corte Internacional de Justicia.
Well, one of the questions that we have, and we appreciate your time, is what do you see the role of the media in this whole issue of landlocked nations, on the perception from every country about the legal rights, about their way they are accessing to the seacoast. The media plays a role. So what do you think that role should be?
Well, I think the media is very important for raising international awareness of the special needs confronted by landlocked developing countries. But first, I think it is for the media, I think they have to show the international community that the landlocked developing countries are in a very difficult situation because of the disadvantaged geographical situation, and the landlocked developing countries need international attention and support. So that is very important for the international, at the global level, to raise the international awareness of the special needs of landlocked developing countries. So we have in our office we have an advocacy unit. The key purpose of the advocacy unit is to raise the international awareness of on these issues, and then also we work very closely with the United Nations Department on Public Information, and that is the global level. It is very important. At the national level, I think the role of media is also very important. I think the citizens of landlocked developing countries have to understand that because of the high transport costs, the goods they are buying in Bolivia and any other landlocked developing countries are very expensive. So everybody needs to make efforts to reduce the impact of high transport costs. One of the main way to reduce the high transport costs and dependence on the transit neighbors is to reform your economy, to make the structural transformation, to diversify your economy, to add value to your goods. For example, if you export raw materials, the raw material it will be very dependent on the transport costs. If you export value-added goods like computers, like information technologies, the dependence on the transport cost is very minimal. So I think it is very important also to educate your private sector, your citizens, why Bolivian economy need to be diversified, why they have to produce things in order to reduce the export dependence, why Bolivia needs to process the commodities in Bolivia. So that is, the media plays very important role in that aspect, and then also the media should also challenge the key stakeholders, because media should challenge the border crossing corruption at the border crossing. Media should challenge the customs authorities. Media should challenge the transport service providers to reduce the corruption, to increase the efficiency, to make things transparent. And then the media also should play a very important role to make the rules and regulations transparent for the traders of landlocked developing countries. As I mentioned to you before, that the importance of the trade facilitation agreement of the WTO. One of the main principles of the WTO agreement is to make the rules and regulations transparent for the contracting parties. So in other words, Bolivia has a full right to demand your transit neighbor that your regulations on the transit services should be transparent. So media should play a very important role to make things transparent.
Well, I appreciate so very much the time. This has been a long road since February of 1957, when the landlocked countries were first acknowledged by the General Assembly. And as we can learn from this, there's a tremendous complexity both at the side of the landlocked nation, at the side of the neighboring nation. And we so much appreciate the work that you are doing with your organization, bringing the resources and the international resources, the consensus of many nations to support this unique situation. Thank you very much for spending this time with us. Certainly we have been enriched by the information that we have received, and we hope to have you soon in the program, as there are so many more issues that we have not been able to discuss, but this has been a great beginning. Mr. Erdenebileg, por favor, if you could please give us your final greetings to the audience here in Bolivia and the neighboring countries.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you on the issue of the landlocked developing countries, and thank you very much for your giving the attention to the issues of the landlocked developing countries. I know the agenda of landlocked developing countries is very high for the government of Bolivia, and then I know that your president, Mr. Morales gave a lot of importance and attention to the issue of the landlocked developing countries. I remember that he came to the United Nations conference in Vienna, made a very strong statement, and then also he came to our meeting last year in Santa Cruz and made a very strong statement. And then we also appreciate the leadership provided by Bolivia in promoting the cause of landlocked developing countries. And thank you very much again. If you need any assistance from us, if you need to talk to us, to me, to any of my colleagues, please feel free. You can contact us anytime. We can talk to your audience anytime. It will be our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Hemos dialogado con el jefe del Servicio de Formulación de Políticas, Movilización, Coordinación y Presentación de Informes de la Oficina de las Naciones Unidas para los Países Menos Adelantados, Países en Desarrollo sin Litoral y Pequeños Estados Insulares en Desarrollo de las Naciones Unidas. Sus iniciales son OHRLLS y ellos trabajan desde 2002, desde las Naciones Unidas. Hemos sostenido este diálogo con nuestro corresponsal, Juan Carlos Salcedo. Juan Carlos, siempre agradecidos por estos contactos contigo.
Gracias, muy amable. Ha sido un placer estar nuevamente en contacto con la audiencia de La Verdad Nos Hace Libres y hasta cualquier otro momento. Gracias.
Okay, Mr. Sandagdorj, thank you very much for this time. Gracias por este tiempo.
Thank you very much.
I really appreciate it because this is beyond the circular dialogue that we have for a long time, because we only see from our perspective. And I so much appreciated you bringing a global perspective into this and being so aware of our needs. And I'm very, very excited about the level of discussion that you were able to bring into this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, adios. Thank you very much.
Okay, gracias.
Thank you,
Así.
Luis, and thank you everybody who made it possible. We will give you a link to a final draft of this when it's broadcast, so you can have that. Okay?
Voy a cerrar, Pocho, quédense ahí un momento, stand by, please. Tengo que cerrar el espacio y tengo que cerrarlos con ustedes, ahí, mirando. Ok, gracias. Así hemos seguido de cerca este diálogo con el representante de esta oficina tan importante de las Naciones Unidas y nuestro corresponsal Juan Carlos Salcedo desde Nueva York. Nosotros hacemos una pausa y ya retornamos con más.